Well, if you don't know what I'm doing in these by now, or if you just stumbled across this series, then I'd suggest going back to episode 1 by clicking on this handy little YouTube annotation fella. Right then. Compared to the last exercise, this one was much more relaxing. Luckily, there isn't much to explain except that this chapter encourages us to play around with different lengths of line than the 10-syllable pentameter we've been using so far. I could get into more detail about that, but then I wouldn't be so much making videos about my working through Stephen Fry's poetry exercises as I'd be reading the whole book to you. But before we progress to the results of my tackling the fifth exercise, I think it'd be useful to quickly go over some basic units of poetry, and I'll start that by answering a question from regular commenter and international Playboy bon vivant, Metalorg. He was curious about the most basic unit, which is the weak versus the strong syllable. How do we know which is which? Well, it is actually a kind of somewhat subjective thing that actually changes quite dramatically depending on what language you're using. In Stephen's book, he explains how the French, poetry is completely different for them, but I won't get into that. However, for the English, a basic rule of thumb is to look at what the operative syllable is. For example, quickly, right? Well, we always put the stress on quick. People don't say quickly, they say quickly. Not quickly, right? So, that would make quick the hard syllable, and lee the soft syllable. I can get into a lot more detail, could easily do a whole video about this, but I'm going to leave it for now, and I'll try and find some good links maybe I can put up in the info bar that can help with this. So, moving on, other terms that will be useful for the coming exercise to go over are I am, which is of course a pair of syllables, weak, strong, trochki, which is strong, weak. Then there are docked weak endings, which is basically when you have a weak ending line, but then, pow, you knock the weak ending off the end and change the amount of syllables. And finally, quatrains, which, simply enough, are sort of bodies of poetry that are 4 lines in length. Okay? Exercise number 5 involves writing 3 pairs of quatrains. The first pair are to be your standard 8-syllable iambic tetrameters. The second pair alternate in each line between iambic tetrameter and trimeter. In the final pair, you are to write trochaic tetrameter, and on every other line, you have to make use of a docked weak ending, rendering the line 7 syllables with a strong syllable on the end. Fry assigns you the subject of television this time, and he suggests you don't spend more or less than 45 minutes writing. As always, the point here is to learn, and not to worry about creating something that, when spoken, will cause all wars to be replaced by very competitive hugging competitions. I should also point out that this is the first exercise in the book where rhyming is okay. At least Stephen Fry does it in his example, so I sure as heck had fun with it. Right then. Chapter 3, Exercise 5. The internet is my TV, and has been since 2006. Cable packages too costly, most content worth a bag of dicks. Please don't tell me this is thieving, you'll hardly get much sympathy. The legal choice makes my eyes sting. Monopoly, monstrosity. Mad Men's my show at the moment, cloaking stories in style. Illicit sex, the main event, a soap in sheep's clothing. It should have stopped at season 2, Don Draper's story resolved. They no longer knew what to do. I don't know. More affairs? Is cable something I'm missing? I would say the answer's no. Having to keep from pissing in case you missed the show? But maybe I miss forgetting. Shows I watched in childhood. Wikipedia and YouTube remind me most weren't that good. Speaking of childhood cartoons, I'll close by highlighting this thing I put in the margins of my poetry notebook. I suppose my idea was that when the condom was removed, then the pirate ghost would be revealed to be none other than your penis?
Would all this be true if I didn't care for you?